I learned my father had sold my place at the auction, the same way I learned most things in that house, by overhearing it from the corridor. I was 22, which is 2 winters older than the upper edge of marriageable in the northern packs, and 4 winters past the age at which my stepmother had stopped looking at me without doing a small calculation behind her eyes. I had been standing in the corridor outside the study with a tray of cooling tea, waiting for the conversation to finish so I could go in and take the empty cups, when I heard my father say the word veil debt, and then, after a pause, the word slot. I lowered the tray very carefully onto the side table outside the door. I did not want to drop it. I had broken a tray once when I was 16, and my stepmother had explained to me at length the difference between a daughter who served and a daughter who was useful, and I had not broken a tray since. I leaned against the wall and listened. "It is the cleanest way," my stepmother was saying. "House Tyrrell is offering 1,000 silver and forgiveness on the Western field debt for the slot. Their daughter is 16 and pretty enough. They will be glad of it." "And Mira?" my father said. There was a pause that I recognized. "Mira will be told tomorrow," my stepmother said. "What is the difficulty? She would not have drawn a bid in any case. We have given her 4 winters at the auction-eligible age. No one of consequence has even looked. We owe House Vale the money. House Tyrrell will pay it for the slot. The matter resolves itself." My father made a sound that was not agreement and was not refusal. "It is a kindness in the end," my stepmother said. "Better she not stand on the dais and be passed over a 5th time. The girl has pride. She would feel it." I thought, from the corridor, that this was the most considerate my stepmother had been about my feelings in 5 winters of marriage to my father. I picked up the tray. I went down the back stair. I did not bring them their tea. In the kitchen, I sat for a while looking at the cooling cups and trying to decide whether I was upset. I had expected in some way that this year would be different. I had not believed it. The mating auction was a northern custom, an old one, a public one, a humiliating one if you stood 5 times and went unclaimed. I had stood 4 times. I had been chosen by no one of consequence, and by several men of no consequence, whose offers my father had refused without consulting me, which was the closest thing to a kindness he had ever done me, and which I had never thanked him for. I had not expected to be chosen this year either. I had expected to stand on the dais one final time, age past the limit, and walk off it released. I had been quietly looking forward to it. The dais was the last room in which my stepmother could insist I be looked at. She had sold the room. I sat in the kitchen until the cook came in and pretended not to see me. The cook had been with the house since my mother was alive. She knew which silences in me were the working kind. She set a piece of yesterday's bread on the table within my reach, and did not look at me when I took it. I went to bed without speaking to anyone. I did not sleep well, which is to say, I slept the way one sleeps when one is 22 and has just been informed by an overheard conversation that one's life has been sold for a debt payment to the Vale family. By the time the first grey came into the window, I had given up on sleep entirely and was sitting on the edge of the bed in my shift, staring at the rug. Someone knocked at the front gate of the house. Not the back gate, not the kitchen door. The front gate of the manor, where no one knocked at this hour because no one was expected to. I went to the window. The courier was royal. The black cloak with the silver wolf clasp at the throat. A pair of riders behind him in the king's iron grey. He was holding a sealed document in his gloved hand. The grey light caught on the wax. The whole house woke up at once. I heard my father curse, then my stepmother's voice, sharper than she allowed it to be in public. Boots on the front stair. My stepmother passing my door without stopping, fastening her overgown as she went. I dressed. I came down the stair into the front hall in time to see the courier place the sealed writ into my father's hand. My father was barefoot. My stepmother stood beside him, with her hair only half pinned. They both looked, for the first time in my life, like people who had not been expecting something. The courier turned to me. He had not been told which of the household was me. He had been told, evidently, that he would know. "Mistress Mira, a veil on the reach," he said. "Yes," I said. He bowed. "His Grace, King Torvald of the Iron Territories, sends his compliments. The auction slot allocated to the named woman has been purchased in full as of midnight last. The transfer of slot from House Tyrrhen has been retracted by royal writ. The named woman is to consider herself under the King's contract from this hour, with terms to be presented at the Court of Audience 2 days hence. The matter of debts outstanding between House Vale on the Reach and House Vale of the Western March has been settled separately by the Crown. The named woman is requested, not commanded, to be present at the Court of Audience to hear her terms and accept or refuse them." He held out the sealed writ. My father did not take it from his hand. I did. The courier bowed again. He left. My stepmother went very white, and then very red, and stood in the front hall in her half-pinned hair, looking like a woman who had been about to win a card game and had just been informed the rules had changed. I opened the writ. It was, as the courier had said, an offer of contract. The hand was tight, clean, and slightly impatient at the downstrokes. I had only ever seen the King's hand on one thing in my life, and it had been a writ of safe conduct nailed to a post in the market 3 winters ago. I recognised the impatience. I did not, that morning, recognise the man. I had met King Torvald once. I had not, until that moment, been entirely certain he had been in the room. It had been 3 winters ago. He had come north for some matter of falconry, a hunt, a gifting of birds, something my father had hosted for 2 days, and afterward had spoken of for 3 months. I had not attended the meals. I had been in the mews when one of the King's falconers had taken a tumble on the ice and dropped his glove, and the bird he had been carrying, a young goshawk, jest but unsettled, had baited badly and threatened to drag the man on his knees across the frozen yard. The falconer had been older than my father and had not been quick enough to recover. I had picked up the dropped glove and pulled it on, the leather still warm, and I had taken the bird from his arm onto mine, clumsily, my forearm trembling under the weight of her, and stood very still until she had settled. A man had come into the mews behind me at some point during that. I had not turned around. I had been holding a goshawk on a glove 3 sizes too large for me, and I had not been able to spare attention. He had stood for a long time without speaking. When the falconer finally got up off his knees and took the bird back, the man behind me had said, "Thank you." Just that. I had said, "Your Grace," because I had recognized the voice without needing to turn, and I had handed the falconer back his glove, and I had gone back to the kitchen. I had told no one. I had not, 3 winters on, mentioned it to anyone in the house. It had not seemed worth mentioning. He had said thank you. I had said your grace. That had been all. I sat on the edge of my bed with the king's sealed writ in my lap that morning and thought, he remembered. I thought, that cannot be the reason. I thought also, I am not so practiced in being wanted that I am able to imagine other reasons. My stepmother knocked on my door an hour later. She had recovered her hair. She had recovered her face. She came in carrying a cup of tea I had not asked for, which was a thing she had not done since my mother died, and she sat on the chair by the window in a way that suggested she had been planning what to say since the courier rode off. "Mira," she said, "we must discuss what to tell the court." "What to tell them?" I said. "You are not well," my stepmother said. "I noticed it yesterday. A fever, perhaps. The road to the capital is hard for a woman in poor health. House Tyrann's daughter is already prepared. The Val debt can be settled some other way. The Crown will accept a substitute." I looked at her for a moment. I looked at the tea. I looked back at her. "No," I said. It was, I realise now, the first time I had ever said that word to her directly. She had not been expecting it. I had not been expecting it either. We were both, briefly, the same kind of surprised. She left without the cup. I drank the tea, because it was perfectly good tea, and I was not going to waste it. And I thought, very carefully, about the next 2 days. 2 mornings later, I rode into the capital in the back of a covered cart, because my father had refused to send me in the family carriage, and my stepmother had refused to lend me a woman, and the cook had quietly arranged the cart through the village wheelwright. I arrived at the gates of the capital alone, with 1 satchel of my own things, wearing the dark green wool gown that had been my mother's and which had been recut to fit me when I was 19. The court of audience was held in the lesser hall, which had stone floors warmed by underchannels and tall, narrow windows that took the light in long bars. There was a dais. There was a wolf throne. There was, on the dais, the king. I had not in 3 winters looked directly at his face for more than the time it had taken to say 2 words. I looked now. He was, I will say, a man one noticed, not the way the songs would suggest. He was not gleaming or terrible. He was tall and quiet, and held himself in the kind of stillness that did not advertise itself, the kind of stillness a falcon holds before deciding. His hair was the rough dark of a man who did not bother with his hair. The iron collar at his throat caught the bars of window light and broke them. He watched me come down the hall with the unhurried attention of a man who had been waiting for me to arrive and was not going to pretend otherwise. The herald spoke my name. The terms were read. The terms were elaborate, excessively so. The king had drawn, or had drawn, a contract that included a full settlement of every debt my father's house held, the establishment of a separate dower fund in my name, a clause permitting me to refuse the marriage at any point within the contract year without penalty and without surrender of the dower, and a sub-clause which I caught even on first reading, ensuring that if I refused, no further suit could be brought against me through the auction system in perpetuity. He had thought about it. He had thought about it carefully. He had also, I noticed, included 3 separate provisions for the import of falconry stock from the southern coasts, which had nothing whatever to do with my marriage, and which I suspected he had added because he had been writing the contract late at night and had begun at some point to think about hawks. The herald finished. The hall waited. "Your Grace," I said, because someone had to speak, and the king had clearly decided he was not going to speak first. "Mistress Mira," he said, "your terms are generous." I had thought so. "You have included 3 separate clauses about falconry stock." There was a pause. The court, which had been holding itself in the kind of silence that is also a kind of listening, did not move. "I have," the king said. "They do not appear to bear on the marriage." "They do not," he said. "Why are they in the contract?" He took a breath. He let it out. He said, with the kind of careful precision of a man who had rehearsed every other sentence of this audience and had not rehearsed this one, "It seemed a waste of good parchment to have you read only one document. I included items I wished you to consider as a separate matter. Falconry stock." "Falconry stock," the king agreed. Someone at the back of the hall coughed in a way that was not really a cough. A woman 2 rows in, I knew vaguely as an adviser, turned her face toward the window for a moment. I did not laugh. I was very close to laughing, and I did not. I am not laughing now, looking back. I am telling you this because his face, while he answered me about the falconry stock, did the smallest thing, a softening at the corner of the mouth that he was very actively trying not to allow, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. "I will accept the contract," I said, "provisionally, as your subclause permits, with one amendment." "Name it." "I would like to read the falconry stock provisions in private." The corner of his mouth lost the battle. "They will be sent to your rooms," the king said. The audience was concluded. The terms were sealed. I was, by the writ of King Torvald of the Iron Territories, contracted to the crown. My stepmother stood up at the back of the hall before the herald had finished. "Your Grace," she said in a clear, carrying voice, "with regret, I must inform the court that the named woman is not in full health. Her fever this past week has been severe. The household physician has counselled that she is not yet of sound enough mind to enter a binding agreement of this gravity. We humbly ask that the slot revert to House Tyrrhen, whose daughter—" The king looked at her. The king looked at her for the length of time it would take a man to consider and discard several possible answers. Then he said, very mildly, "Your daughter has spoken to me at length about falconry. She seemed in command of her wits. If she would like, I can recall the questions she asked. They were specific." My stepmother went the white, then red again. She sat down. I did not look at her. I did not look at the king either. I looked at the floor, and I did not let my face do anything, because if I had let it do anything, I would have laughed in the lesser hall of the capital, and a woman about to enter a contract of state should not laugh. If you have stayed with me this far, stay a moment longer. I will tell you what I found 2 days after in his study. It was the thing that turned the contract into something else. If her voice is keeping you company tonight, the kindness would be to subscribe, so the next of these stories finds you when it comes. Now, the study. The king's study was on the 3rd floor of the palace, in a tower that overlooked the mews. I had been escorted there 2 mornings after the contract was sealed, on his request, to discuss the household I would have under the contract year. He had been called away by a messenger the moment I arrived. He had asked me, with what I now understood to be his particular kind of formality, to wait. I waited. I am not a woman who pokes through other people's rooms. I had been a daughter in a house where poking would have been measured and accounted, and the habit of not poking had set deep in me by 22. But the study had a small desk against the wall, and on the desk, in plain view, was a leather-bound ledger. It was open. I did not lean over to read it. I leaned only as far as a woman who had been told to wait could reasonably lean. It was a list. Names, dates, brief notations. Under the heading, Persons under the King's Quiet Protection. I recognized 2 of the names. The cook's nephew, who had been pardoned of a poaching charge last winter without anyone in the village understanding why. An old hedge witch from the eastern reaches, who had been left alone after the council had ordered her examined. My name was on the list. Of course it was. It had been added the winter of the falconry visit 3 years ago. The notation beside it said, Vale on the Reach, Mews, goshawk. Did not turn around. That was all it said. I sat down on the chair by the desk because my knees, briefly, were not interested in continuing to do their job. He had remembered. He had not just remembered, he had written it down. 3 winters ago. He had written down, did not turn around, as if that small fact had been a thing worth keeping, and he had kept me under his protection from that month on, and when my family had tried to sell my slot at the auction, the news had reached him within hours, because I was on a list he checked. There was, on the wall behind the desk, a glove. A falconer's glove, 3 sizes too large for any reasonable hand. Old leather, worn, tasselled at the wrist. It was hung on a small iron hook. Beneath it on the wall was a strip of vellum the size of a man's thumb, on which the same hand had written, in 3 winters old ink, Mews, Vale on the Reach, returned. The king's footsteps in the corridor outside. I straightened. I did not move toward the desk. I sat down on the chair by the window with my hands folded and my back very straight, and when he came in, I was looking at the mews through the window, which was a perfectly innocent thing to be doing. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at me. He looked at the ledger, which was still open. He looked at the glove on the wall. He looked back at me. "Mistress Mira," he said. "Your Grace?" "You have been waiting." "I have." "You have been looking at the wall." I considered briefly whether to lie. I am not, in the main, a liar. I had also just been informed by a strip of vellum on a wall that I had been kept watch over by a king for 3 winters. "I have been looking at the glove," I said. He came into the room. He did not close the door. I noticed that he did not close the door, and I appreciated it, because a king who closes the door in such a moment is a man who has decided the conversation is his to control, and Torvald had not done that. He sat down in the chair across from mine. He did not sit on the wolf throne. There was no wolf throne in the study. There was an old chair with a cushion that had been mended at one corner. "That glove," he said, "is yours if you would like to have it back. I should have returned it 3 winters ago. I did not." "It is not mine," I said. "It belongs to your falconer." "He bought himself a new one with the king's purse the next week," the king said. "That one has been on my wall since." I did not know what to do with that. "I will speak plainly," he said after a moment, "because I have been speaking around it for 2 audiences and a contract, and you deserve plainer than that." "Plainer would be welcome," I said. "I did not buy back your slot because of an auction," the king said. "I bought it back because the auction was the first reason I had been offered to act on a thing I had been waiting for an excuse to act on. I did not want to court you in the manner of the dais. I would not have allowed you to stand on it a 5th time. I had given my steward instruction 2 winters ago that any movement of your name in any auction roster was to be brought to me at any hour. He brought it to me at midnight 3 nights past. By the time I had finished reading the report, I had already written the writ." He had. The hand on the writ had been slightly impatient at the downstrokes. "And the contract?" I said. "I drew the contract over 2 nights," he said, "because I wanted it to be impossible for you to feel cornered by it. The refusal clause, the dower in your name, the provision against further auction. I included the falconry stock provisions because I was tired, and I did not want to send the contract until morning, and I had time on my hands." "You included the falconry stock provisions," I said, "in a marriage contract." "I have admitted as much, yes. Your Grace." "Yes. I am going to speak plainly also. Please." I took a breath. I was not used to speaking plainly. The house I had been raised in had not been a house for plainness. "I do not want to be bound to you by the auction's contract," I said. "I am willing to be courted by you. I am, in fact, more than willing. But the binding clause in the auction contract is old law. It is binding on the wolf for the contract year, regardless of consent. I will not enter a marriage I cannot freely walk away from on the day of the vow. I want the binding dissolved before I speak any vow. If you can find me on the other side of that dissolution and still want to ask me then." He was quiet for a long moment. "The dissolution of an auction binding at the half-moon costs both parties," he said. "It is not without—" "I know what it costs." "You have read the old law." "I have." He looked at me. He looked at the ledger. He looked back at me. "All right," he said. It was the 2nd smallest answer a king has ever given me, and it was the one I have replayed most. We dissolved the binding at the half-moon, in the old way, in the upper courtyard of the palace, with 2 witnesses and 1 priest of the old rite. The cost on him was a splitting of the skin of his right palm where the contract had been ink-signed, the place the binding clung. The cost on me was a fever that did not break for 2 days and left me, when it lifted, hollow feeling and quiet for nearly a week. He sat with me through both nights of it, in the chair by my bed, not speaking, not reaching, sometimes reading. On the 2nd night, he turned a page and said, into the room, without looking at me, "If you tell me to leave, I will leave." "Don't," I said, from the fever. "I am only telling the ceiling things." "What are you telling it?" that you are not as cold as you think you are." His face, I think, did something. I did not have the strength to turn my head. In the meantime, my stepmother was busy. She had not given up on the substitution. She had, by the second day of my fever, forged a letter in what she clearly believed to be my hand, declining the contract on grounds of poor health and requesting the slot revert to House Tyrrell. The forgery was not bad. It was not good, either. She had used my looped L and forgotten that I had stopped looping the L when I was 19. The letter was carried to the palace by a runner she had hired in the city. The runner was intercepted at the second gate by a beater of the King's Guard, who had been instructed, in the King's own quiet way, to intercept any letter from House Vale on the Reach that was not in my own present handwriting. The forged letter was given to the King. The King handed it to me, fever quiet on the third evening, and asked whether I had written it. I had not. I told him so. He nodded. He did not throw the letter into the fire. He filed it. 2 days later, in the corridor of the eastern wing where I had gone, slowly on the cook's arm, because we had brought the cook with us from the manor, and she had refused to leave me alone in a palace, 2 men in livery I did not recognize approached us, with papers they claimed were a writ of paternal recall. They had, they said, the right to remove me back to my father's house, pending the dissolution of the contract, on grounds of incapacity. The cook stepped, very practically, between me and them, and started shouting for the guard. The guard arrived before the men got past her. The papers were forgeries. The men were not, on closer examination, men in true Vale on the Reach livery, only a passable imitation. My stepmother had paid them. She admitted it later, under questioning, with a kind of cold composure that I had once mistaken for strength. She was stripped of her position by the King's order. My father was permitted to retain his house. House Vale on the Reach was placed under a 5-year Crown audit on the matter of the Western Field debts and the auction slot trade, which the Crown had decided, in its own quiet way, to investigate thoroughly. A month after the binding was dissolved, Torvald asked me, in the mews, whether I would marry him. He was holding the falconer's glove, the old one, the one that had been on his wall. He held it out. "This is yours," he said. "I should have given it back 3 winters ago. I am giving it back now. If you would like to wear it, the goshawk has been waiting for you. Her name is Asher. She remembered you, I think. I cannot prove it." I put the glove on. It was still 3 sizes too large. "Your Grace?" I said. "Torvald," he said. "If you will." "Torvald," I said. "Yes." He kissed me, only once and only briefly, with the careful precision of a man who had drawn an entire contract around the possibility of refusal and was determined to honour the spirit of his own clauses. It was a kiss that asked. I answered it. Something in me, which had been waiting at the corridor outside a study, walked back into the room. We were married in the late summer, after the binding had been long dissolved and the courting had been long done. It was not, in the end, a small ceremony. The northern packs came, the southern coasts sent falcons. The cook wept at the back of the hall and pretended she had something in her eye. A year on, I will tell you the small thing. The glove hangs in our private rooms now, on a hook by the door, where I can reach it without thinking. The goshawk Asher lives in the royal mews and has condescended, after considerable persuasion, to let me carry her on most mornings. Torvald reads in the chair by the window in the evening. He still drafts contracts late at night, and includes, in the margins, irrelevances about falconry stock. I have stopped striking them out. They are how he tells me the contract was written with affection. My stepmother is, by last report, living quietly on a small holding in the eastern reaches. House Tyrann's daughter Bryony, whose name was nearly traded for mine, has been a guest at the palace twice. She is 16 and bright and not, I have decided, anyone's substitute for anything. I have told her so. I have stopped overhearing things from corridors. I walk into rooms now. Doors open for me. It still surprises me. I do not show it. Tell me, did you guess it was the goshawk that did it? Did you see the moment the glove had been kept all those winters, or did it land on you, the way it landed on me, in a tower study with my knees giving out on a borrowed chair? Stay a while. Tell me in the comments where you were listening from tonight and which line stopped you. If you would like more of these stories, the kindness would be to subscribe so the next one finds you the way the writ found me, before dawn, sealed, with the matter already decided. Sleep well. The glove still fits the same. I am the one who has changed size.